If you're the owner of a 2009 and newer 5.7 Hemi and you're looking for a no tune required intake that's gonna pack plenty of flash, well then let me introduce you to the K&N Series 69 Typhoon intake that we have today. Now the K&N will combine one of their legendary oiled filters here with the corresponding mandrel bent polished aluminum intake tube, and of course your matching hardware and heat shield for right around that $400 price point. Now since the install is going to be very straightforward here, so it's going to stick with a 1 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter. Call this one about an hour to complete from start to finish, but if you hang with me for a bit, we'll walk you through that job later in the video. So K&N's one of those names in the intake category that really needs no introduction, as they are one of the most recognizable names in the automotive aftermarket. Now the Series 69 that we have here today is going to be one of a few different options K&N offers for the Hemi crowd, and at the time of this video will be one of your only options to deliver that brightly polished finish, which is certainly going to stand out under the hood compared to other black or gray options that tend to kind of dominate the category. But aside from the underhood bling here with the K&N, it's also going to feature what is called an open element or open filter design with the included heat shield, which to me is going to have its pros and its cons. Now the pros here will be a dramatic increase in engine noise coming from under the hood under hard acceleration, along with a much cooler look compared to a more traditional sealed enclosure. Now the con, or the drawback to this style of design, is that you're not really fully isolating the filter from any hot engine bay air, and at that point something like this might be a little bit more susceptible to heat soak compared to those sealed enclosures. So it really boils down to what's important to you guys. Do you prefer a more modified look, or are you trying to eliminate heat soak? Whatever the case, we have plenty of options here on the site for you guys to choose from. But what does this all mean when it comes time to talk about power? Well, K&N doesn't disclose any specific numbers here for the Hemi and the Typhoon intake, but in my opinion and my experience, something like this with a no tune required intake, you're typically going to look at high single digit, low double digit horsepower and torque gains at most, along with things like improved throttle response, a little bit better fuel economy if you can keep your foot out of the pedal, of course, along with the more modified appearance that we covered earlier, and of course the increase in noise. Now as far as your components are concerned, well, of course you can look forward to that mirror polished aluminum intake tube, very, very sharp there, along with one of K&N's signature cotton gauze filters here. It is an oiled filter again, therefore you can wash this thing, you can reuse it after re-oiling, and basically last the life of your Hemi. Now the Typhoon does also include an aluminum heat shield here, which does receive a weather stripping as well to go to the top portion of the heat shield, and basically that's going to help seal this thing to the underside of your factory or aftermarket hood and block out as much of that hot engine bay air as possible. Now the intake is CARB certified, meaning it is legal for use in all 50 states, and again will be backed by K&N's million-mile warranty or 10-year warranty, whatever comes first. But now let's segue into the install as promised earlier. And again, this one's pretty straightforward, guys, as most intakes are. So expect run-of-the-mill 1 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter and maybe an hour to complete from start to finish. But to give you a better idea of just how this will go down on your Hemi at home, check out our detailed walkthrough and tool breakdown right now.
The tools used for this install are a ratchet, 16, 13, 10, and 8mm sockets, a short extension, 14 and 10mm wrenches, some diagonal cutters, and a hose cutter. For this install, we are going to be replacing our factory air box and intake tube. There's only a few simple hand tools that you'll need to get this job done, and I'm going to walk you through every step of the process. So let's get started. I'm going to start by removing the engine cover here on top. That just pops out. And this will expose all of my connections and clamps that I'll need to remove to get my intake tube and airbox out of the vehicle. I'm going to get started by removing the plug for my mass airflow sensor. This mass airflow sensor is going to get transferred into the new intake assembly, and then I can take my 8mm socket here on my ratchet and I'm going to loosen up the clamp here at the throttle body. My next step is going to be disconnecting the PCV breather line. That's going to be next to the oil fill cap, and then I can unbolt my airbox and remove it from the engine compartment. Once again, using my 8mm socket on my ratchet, I can unbolt the airbox from the engine compartment and pull this out. This bracket located here on the front of the engine will need to be removed. This mounts the intake resonator for the stock airbox, but it will not be reused for our new intake assembly. So I'm going to use a 16mm socket on my ratchet and pull this nut off and remove the bracket. Before we can install our new intake into the vehicle, there is a little bit of assembly required. They provide you with an O-ring grommet that goes into the intake tube. This is going to be for your mass airflow sensor, so just slide that into place. They also provide you with a nipple that screws into the intake tube. This is going to be for your PCV breather, and I'll just screw that into place and tighten it up with a 14mm wrench. Next, I can install my Venturi tube into my intake filter, and I'll tighten down that clamp with an 8mm socket. Next, I'll need to remove my factory mass airflow sensor from my intake tube and transfer it over to my new intake tube assembly. Just twist it to the left and pull it out. Make sure you are mindful of the locking tab orientation, and then install it into your new one. Now I can install my mass airflow sensor into my new intake tube. Just make sure that the opening in the element here is pointed in the direction of airflow, and just slide that into place. And push until the O-ring is seated. Now I'm ready to install my elbow onto my intake tube. I'm just going to loosely install my clamps into place. And then I'll slide this over to the intake tube. Now we're ready to start installing our airbox. With our intake tube set aside, now we can begin the assembly of the airbox or heat shield assembly. We're going to start by installing this L bracket here on the front of the airbox. This is going to attach to another bracket that we're going to be mounting to the vehicle in another step a little later on. I'm just going to use the provided hardware, which is a bolt, washer, another washer, and a nylock nut. I'll get those started, and then I can snug them down with a 10mm socket and wrench. I'm not going to tighten them too much because I might have to make some adjustments once I get onto the car. The kit provides you with some weather stripping that needs to be installed at the top and the bottom of the airbox heat shield assembly. So the shorter piece of weather stripping is going to go along the top, and the longer piece of weather stripping will go along the bottom. All you have to do is just slide it over the edge and push it down into place all the way around the perimeter. If there is any excess sticking off the end of the weather stripping, just take a pair of cutters and snip the ends of it. And now I can install the weather stripping that goes along the bottom of the heat shield airbox assembly. Just like I did for the upper piece of weather stripping, I'll do the same for the bottom and just work my way around the perimeter, pressing down to lock it into place. And once again, any excess can just be trimmed off with some cutters. The next thing I'll need to do in order to install my heat shield airbox assembly into place is install this provided bracket using the provided hardware. It's just a bolt with some large fender washers and a nylock nut. And I'm actually going to install this to the core support here on this second hole that's right underneath behind the headlight. So I'll put my bracket into place with the bolt going through, and then I can put my washer and my nylock nut on the bottom and tighten those down with a 10mm socket and wrench. I'm gonna leave this loose enough so that I can move it around and line up all of my bolt holes after I install my heat shield, so just keep that in mind when you're tightening this down. Now we can go ahead and install our heat shield air box, and you can see our angled bracket here lines up with the factory mounting tab, and the hole over here lines up with the twist bracket that we just installed. I'm just going to reuse the factory mounting bolt here at the factory mounting location. I'll get that started by hand. And then I can use the provided hardware to go through the twist bracket into the heat shield air box. I'll use my 8mm socket on my ratchet to tighten down the factory bolt, and then I'll use my 10mm sockets and wrenches to tighten down the provided hardware. Now I can go ahead and use my 10mm socket and wrench to tighten up all of the provided hardware. Next, I need to install the support bracket for the intake tube. They provide an 1/8" spacer. This is going to go between the bracket and the engine. Just use the provided bolt and washer on the bracket and just loosely install this to the front of the engine. I'm going to leave this loose so that I can line up all of my bolt holes after my intake tube is installed, get everything started, and then I'll tighten it down. Now I can go ahead and install my intake tube onto my throttle body and line up my bracket with the support bracket hole. Then using the provided bolt, washer, and lock washer, I can just get that started by hand in the threaded insert here in the intake tube. That'll hold everything in place while I install the filter element. Before I can throw my filter into place, I'm just going to slide on the silicone coupling and also slide on the provided clamps. Now we can go ahead and slide our filter element into place and slide the silicone coupling over the intake tube. Now I'm going to start tightening up some of my clamps here just to get everything situated into place, and then I'll work my way from one clamp to the next. I'll use my 8mm socket on my ratchet and just work one by one. For these two here on the air filter element, I'm just going to use a small extension on my ratchet with my 8mm socket, and then I can snug these down. Now I can begin tightening up the bolts for my support bracket for my intake tube. I'm going to use my 13mm socket on my ratchet to tighten up the bolt that's on the front of the engine, and then I'm actually going to use my 10mm wrench to tighten up the bolt on the intake tube itself. Now that I have everything secured down nice and tight, I can go ahead and install the provided hose used to replace the PCV line that we removed earlier. Just go ahead and slide that over the nipple that's next to the oil fill and slide that into place. Just slide this on until it has proper engagement. Now the hose is a little bit long, and that's actually on purpose. You can trim it to fit. I have a pair of hose cutters here, but if you only have a razor blade, that'll work just fine. Just lay it out so that you have the right length and then make your cut. Once you have that cut to length, you can go ahead and slide that over the nipple that you installed into the intake tube earlier. And now we can install our mass airflow extension. Because the mass airflow sensor is now on the other side of the intake tube than it was originally, the kit provides you with a small extension harness to get from one side to the other. So just match up your male and female plugs, pass this underneath the intake tube, and then plug the other side into the mass airflow sensor. And they also provide you with a zip tie so that you can zip tie the slack to this stud here on the front of the engine that you removed the bracket from earlier. Go ahead and tighten that up, and then just snip off the rest with some cutters. And finally, now that everything is in and tight, plugged in and secured, we can go ahead and reinstall our engine cover and snap that into place. And that's going to wrap up this review and install of the K&N Series 69 Typhoon cold air intake, fitting your 09 to 21 5.7 liter Hemis without a shaker hood. Thanks for watching, and for all things Challenger, keep it right here at AmericanMuscle.com.